Christine talks with Sean Becker about his Thagomizer design and so much more on this episode of Outside of the Box.
As far as I know, it's more or less the only active 3-pound overhead attack robot in the entire US, which made it really easy because no one had armor. One or two people might have some scrap pieces of titanium, but by and large, I'd go and just eat one battery after the other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And today, I feel like this episode, I was talking about it beforehand, is a long time coming because I feel like I've had most significant folks in the combat robotic space on. But I have Sean Becker here with me, who I have not had on the show, and it's always exciting to have a new guest, but especially somebody that I think has just made a big impact in the combat robotic space. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, hey, it's great to be here, and I'm really excited to just talk some bot.
Yes, I think we always all are. I don't think that there would ever be a time where any of us would say, nah, we don't want to talk about combat robots. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Of course, I think most people who know you heavily because of the Thagomizer style design, and everything. And something that I thought was pretty cool in my research is I knew that like you kind of kickstarted that, but I didn't realize that there was literally an academic paper that was written to like say why this is an ideal design. And as somebody who is like super academic myself, I thought that was so cool that, you come up with this thesis and say this is the way to do it and then go out there and do that. So I kind of want to talk about that origination of Thagomizer and everything that it spawned.
Yeah, no, it's really funny that you managed to find that because that was actually my senior capstone. So I started really getting into robotics in 2021, and that was the my just before my capstone year. And going into my final year, I really wanted to do something related to combat robotics, and I got really lucky, and my capstone professor actually said, yes, go ahead, make a 12-pound version of your robot as your capstone. So I was team lead. I had four other people helping me with this little project, and it was just really fun to one still do my robot stuff, but then two like have an actual academic side to this as well.
Yeah, I thought that it was really neat because, I mean, to me, half of combat robotics, as far as the competitive aspect of it, is looking at your competitors and trying to solve a problem, right? Like, there's these robots that would be difficult to defeat, and you have to find a way to do that. And so part of that is that innovative and creative process. Is that something like an aspect of the sport that you really enjoy? Because that's kind of the vibe that I get.
Yeah, no, I mean that's why I think I do combat robotics above like kind of any other sport because there is just so much creativity that goes into it because you're not really bound. Like, yeah, you have your weight bonuses or your weight limits and a couple safety related rules, but other than that, it is just there's so much freedom in what you can do. And the reality is that like we just haven't even kind of scratched the surface of all the possible archetypes that are out there. We are still kind of in the same mindset, like, okay, spinners are great, but there's so many ways you can possibly use a spinner. And that's what kind of like surprised me when I came up with the whole Thagomizer concept, is that like put the spinner in the back and whip around, and suddenly you can hit things that no one's ever really bothered armoring before. So it really came into its own just by realizing that there is always more out there.
For sure. I'm curious. I didn't read through the entire paper, but I assume that there probably have been combat robots prior to that that led some degree of inspiration between you kind of going the direction that you did. So I want to talk about that from an inspirational perspective because I think most builders today got inspired by a robot or a builder that came before them.
For sure. Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. Like everyone talks about Tombstone as being like the big bot, but Tombstone's like little whip maneuver really was the single driving factor behind the Thagomizer idea. Because his robot isn't really designed to whip around. You know, it's your very it is the archetypical horizontal spinner. But oftentimes he would kind of bait out people to go towards his exposed wheels and then turn the entire robot around and hit them. And it was incredibly effective because when you have that whip around, that turning speed, like you hit people harder, you get more bite, and that just allows you to transfer so much more energy than you would by just, trying to drive into someone normally.
Yeah, for sure. Now, of course, future facing from when you designed that robot, what are your thoughts on just the kind of how others, obviously Jake Hoffman being the most famous with Maximizer, taking that style of robot and having success with it? Honestly, I'm surprised there aren't more people who have tried it. But it obviously is a very effective design. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Jake, of course, has to be mentioned because he is probably the most successful person with the Thagomizer type of robot. Um, no, Jake, fantastic guy. Like, I met him actually in the same year that I was doing the paper and the capstone. He came out to one of the Norwalks, and we had a really, really long conversation about the whole design. And I learned a lot from it. He learned a lot from it, and he kind of came away from that wanting to build his own version. So. I kind of helped him along a bit in the beginning, and then he's obviously taken that design a lot further now. But yeah, when it comes to like why aren't there more Thagomizers, it's a really interesting question because like I love the idea, like I think it's one of those few robots that have a really distinctive fighting style. A lot of robots, they drive into their opponent, and that's kind of the extent of their game plan. But Thagomizers and hammer saws as well, like they have a game plan that doesn't involve just driving in. They want to whip around. They have these almost special moves that other robots don't have. So I think they're incredibly fun to drive because it's not just drive forwards. It's this kind of cat and mouse of you've got to get them to the right distance and then engage this swing behavior. Um, why there's not more Thagomizers? Um, I think that the Thagomizer design really relies a lot on drive. Like it needs to be able to turn around quickly, and that is really hard to do on wood. So Jake's put a lot of effort into designing cleats that to help him swing around. But fundamentally, like you can't swing a Thagomizer around on wood as fast as you can on metal. And yeah, for some reason, most Thagomizers have actually been wood Thagomizers, which I find crazy. And they still find success, but it's I think because it's a design that's more effective on metal than wood, that's why you might not see quite as many of it. And it's also a hard robot to drive. Like Jake will tell you too, like Thagomizers, they just drive like a bus because you have so much weight kind of in the back. When you try to drive forwards and then turn, it has a real bad tendency to kind of overswing. So you kind of have two different distinct driving styles. So if you watch me versus Jake drive, I drive it much slower, especially on steel, because I my goal is to kind of like drive up slowly to them and then whip around at exactly the right time. Whereas Jake, he's a lot more like run in there, swing that massive weapon around, and just blow everything up. And it's awesome because you get to see that kind of reflected in the build of the robot because his tail is this massive UHMW like billet. It's awesomely built. There's lots of reinforcement because that's his driving style is really like throw the weapon in there. Whereas my Thagomizer style robots typically have a very much smaller blade, a hub motor style, where I'm not relying on the opponent. Basically, I'm relying on the opponent never hitting that weapon. I'm controlling the front and then just swinging around quickly for a short shot of their side.
Yeah, yeah, and that actually makes a lot of sense because I tried to rack my brain about it. It seems like every time that there's a pretty successful robot, especially at NHRL, then you see tons of them. Like way back in the day when Shred It Bro was doing really well. You saw all kinds of similar robots to that.
Right.
Mako, all kinds of overhead attack bots. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense with the wood floors that that may be a bit more challenging for folks to attempt. Now, speaking of overhead attack bots, I also want to talk about Strike Point because I think this is another robot that people seem to be very afraid of, which is understandable. I mean, overhead attack bots have a reputation for piercing batteries. I mean, that's, I think, the main concern. All of a sudden, you go up in a cloud of lipo smoke.
Right.
What was the desire to build that type of robot as opposed to Thagomizer? Because obviously, two very different robots.
Right. So the funny thing is that they're actually all kind of connected because when I first started, like my very first robot was a robot called Breakpoint, and that was an Ant-Weight Sawbot, four-wheel drive, and it was kind of it's the Ant-Weight version of what would then become Strike Point. The reason why I came up with Thagomizer is because at the time I think I'd won my first three competitions like ever with Breakpoint. I'm like, this is a really good design, but how do I beat that? Because that's kind of something that I'm always thinking about whenever I see a new robot. I'm like, how does it work, first off, and then how do I beat it? So I had breakpoint, and I'm like, okay, I have this massive wedge on breakpoint, like no horizontal can really go through it. But my wedge, like pretty much every other wedge, ends. It's only in the front. So that kind of brought me to the whole Thagomizer concept. It's like, how do I attack those sides? Strike point then, basically I had done Thagomizer, Minimizer, and I just wanted to make a beetle because I see beetles as being pretty much the most competitive class, if not the most high. Of course, 30s take more effort and planning and everything to build, but just the sheer amount of beetles, like there's so much going on, there's so much energy, that really drew me to that. So I wanted to make a beetle and I had the option of, do I scale up do I scale up Breakpoint or do I scale up Thagomizer? And I went with Breakpoint, so then we ended up with the four-wheel drive hammer saw, because Breakpoint was four-wheel drive, so I wanted to continue that. And yeah, Breakpoint was very successful as well. I think it also won its first three events. Um, and part of that reason is because no one at the time really knew how to fight them because overhead attack robots just really didn't exist in the four-wheel drive class. Because there was Tothic, there was Samurai, and both of those were kind of retired by the time I brought Strike Point into the field. So, as far as I know, it's more or less the only active 3-pound overhead attack robot in the entire US, which made it really easy because no one had armor. I'd go to an event and one or two people might have some scrap pieces of titanium, but by and large, I'd go and just eat one battery after the other, and it was really smooth sailing. And then with time, of course, people caught on. People created their own hammer saws, and with more hammer saws, there came more top armor. Mako, of course, really instilled fear in a lot of the field of just like you need top armor or you're going to get your entire robot cut in half. So with time now, like hammer saws are pretty much one of the meta robots. I mean, if we're looking at 2026, I believe it's hammer saws and verts is kind of like the top bots represented in the field at the moment at Norwalk.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, the wall part two just won a dumpster this year. So that just goes to show like the effectiveness of that type of robot. Now something I'm curious to talk about because I believe it was just one event that you did that, but it was quite a lethal combination is when you brought Endpoint to NHRL and did a collaboration with Supreme Ruler, which at the time I would have said was a pretty scary combination because Supreme Ruler on its own obviously was a very effective robot, but when you combine the ability to pin a robot with the ability to pierce through the top of a robot, that's additionally scary.
Right. No, that was a really fun collaboration. The problem was that I had this was basically the very first outing of Strike Point Mark II. So the very first version of Strike Point V1 was more square, from the top down, it was just a square robot. And V2 kind of incorporated a lot of things that I had been kind of, musing about for the last 1.5 years. But I tried to change a lot of things at the same time. I mean, I went to a hub motor for the hammer saw instead of using just a direct drive with a nylon hub. I went to shufflers. I have this now like kind of flex chassis where there's like multiple layers of carbon fiber that slide over each other to absorb impact. Problem is that and then I also swapped like the newer repeat maxes. It was a lot of changes all at once, and the robot worked, but it kind of struggled. And Supreme Ruler was also a modified version of it. So, he took off a pound for that. Um, so I think both robots weren't quite functioning at their peak performance, but you still have two really good robots. So they were still able to do quite a bit of damage and kind of run through the competition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, take it as a successful event for sure. Now I'm curious just to get your take in, 2026 with the combat robotics landscape because between just certain types of designs becoming more meta and then also different changes in tournament rules and stuff like that have caused people to maybe rethink their designs and things of that nature. What do you think about just those overall changes, both meta way wise and rules way wise, and the designs that have come out of that as a result?
Yeah, I mean, the Norwalk rule change obviously is kind of one of the big topics at the moment, with the remaining, the shuffler bonus stayed the same, which was one big thing, and then the whole change to how the judges kind of score the entire fight. Um, so I'll start with the shuffler bonus. So obviously I have a shuffling robot. Um, I've never actually built a 4.5 shuffling robot. Strike point has always remained at 3 pounds, and then I kind of just add random fun things to it. That is going to be interesting going forwards because mini bots are fun. And it's, I have been doing a lot of work with shufflers because I really do believe that they can kind of become basically equal to two wheels, because kind of what led me down this entire path is again going back to the Thagomizers. Thagomizers struggle on wood. How do you get the most grip possible to turn a Thagomizer as quickly as possible? Well, I think the answer is shufflers, because shufflers have this unique ability to really drive themselves into the ground and just produce a lot more grip than kind of any other wheel could possibly do. So I've spent a lot of time in the last year or two, kind of like honing these what I call equal weight shufflers. I actually have a version of this, and this is kind of exclusive footage. This is a shuffle pod. Hold up, I gotta hold it in front of me. So these are the shuffle pods that were being run on Point. This is the mini bot I was running at Norwalk Champs. What's interesting about these is that if you look, it is a shuffler with a urethane wheel in the middle. So it's a tangent drive shuffler. What's crazy about this is that this entire assembly weighs, I believe, 40 grams, and that is less than a repeat compact by itself, not even including the wheels. So this little mechanism at the moment would get you a weight bonus, but it's quite effective. It drives well, and it takes a lot of the advantages of a gearbox being the greater reduction and applies it to the shuffler, which gives you this really, really lightweight thing. This is a whole different topic, so we can get back to that later. It's just something I've been working on for a while. I'm quite proud of it. Getting back to shufflers, though, I do think that with this technology, with all the other progress that people in the field have done, it's just about time to get rid of it. Like, I don't think it really deserves a place anymore, just because, like, my personal opinion is that it used to be a really cool, novel thing. If you came with a shuffling robot, it's like, wow, look at how intricate this thing is and how novel. And now a lot of the kind of literature is out there. There's lots of CAD designs, there's lots of explanations. You can go to the Norwalk Discord and find CAD models and pictures of how to do it. So that kind of like novelty has worn off a lot. And now I'm hoping with shufflers becoming more, better and better and closer to wheels, that at some point, just get rid of it, let people continue building shufflers, but at that point it becomes cool again because, if you can build an equal weight shuffler, that's what I think is so interesting about the sport. Going back to our previous topics, like we have so much freedom. Why do we need like this kind of artificial buff to one specific archetype? So going to the other top part of the topic, then judges. That's definitely affected hammer saws a lot. I mean, we saw that with some of the controversial decisions because a lot of hammer saws, like they can tack, they can kill, of course, but they really are control bots at heart. And the new rules have really made winning as a control bot very difficult, because you need to be constantly using a weapon. And whereas that's a bit more feasible with a lifting type robot, if you can really like build up that lifter and constantly fire it even into other weapons, hammer saws, like, it is really, really hard to make a hammer saw that can survive a direct weapon-weapon engagement with another vert. So you're also kind of put into this quandary now where the judges essentially, they decide every time you pin whether you could have attacked, and if you didn't attack, then they dock you points. And that's really hard with a hammer saw because oftentimes you'll see me when I pin someone, I will do like a quick lap around the box to try and like see exactly where that hammer saw will land because like the last thing I want to do is lose my weapon. Um, the judges kind of have to make a snap decision from some weird angle of whether I should have fired that hammer saw or not. And based on that decision alone, that affects how many points I get for that engagement. So that's kind of annoying to like have someone else that's not me and not my opponent really influencing the outcome of that match. And then of course once you lose your weapon, with the current rule set, as a hammer saw, you are in trouble. That's the best way I can put it. But because it's just really hard to get any points at that point, because hammer saws, they aren't designed to damage with their weapon. If you're lucky, you can kind of jam your weapon into your opponent's weapon, but with a hammer saw, like that's a $40-50 hub motor you're now willfully just destroying just in the hope of getting a couple more pinpoints. So it's rough, especially compared to a vertical spinner where as long as they're driving into you, they're kind of farming these maximum aggression points.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is a difficult problem as far as finding a way to make that all work, and still allow that level of creative freedom. So I kind of hope as time goes on that something more comes out of that as far as understanding what that should look like moving forward.
Right.
Everything is trial and error with combat robotics, including judging rules. So,
Yeah.
um, what I mean, you kind of already showed a little bit of that as far as like the shuffler pod and maybe some things that you're working on, but that kind of was going to be my next question of is there anything that you're actively working on at this point moving forward? Because obviously you've been known to come up with some really innovative designs, and I'm not sure if because of all of the changes and things like that that we've seen that that's kind of led you into any different directions creatively.
Right. So the shufflers, as I mentioned, I've been working on for a while now, and they were actually kind of done by the time of Norwalk Champs. I had teased, revealing them, and I showed them off to a lot of people at Champs just to kind of get their reaction. Because like there's so much you can learn by just showing someone else a contraption. Because you when you're designing something, oftentimes you get very, very single-minded on how to, approach a problem in one single way. And then as soon as you show it to someone else, they go like, but why not this? And then, another light bulb goes off. And that's really what this community is all about, is just having all these amazing people to kind of like bounce ideas off of, and through that collaboration kind of bring the sport a bit higher. Um, so yeah, so I was working on those shufflers for a while. I've kind of at this point not worked too much more on them, because I wanted to make a video and life gets in the way, and it's just hard. Like, designing and kind of innovating is really fun. Making a video on that is not the part I find fun. I have like a 2-year backlog now on fight videos, and I just never get to it. So it's something I need to do at some point. Um, Looking forward though for the next year or so, I think with the judging rules really penalizing hammer saws, I'm looking into flamethrowers because I think they're a really good solution in the current landscape, because they really, talking about farming aggression points earlier, even though the aggression doesn't exist, and now it's, I think, damage and harm or state. I don't know. It's a long document. I can't remember all of it. Um, but flamethrowers allow you to kind of generate this attack score from a safe distance, which is great as a hammer saw, because hammer saws and flamethrowers actually naturally coexist quite well, because a lot of the forks and the front end controlling geometry of a hammer saw lends itself very well to a flamethrower as well. So that's something I've been looking into. And that's kind of it at the moment. I want to bring 1 pound Thagomizer back and get that running. Um, and another thing that I've been really looking into are these things I've been calling flap forks. So I have actually Thagomizer right here. But on the front here, these are what I've been calling flap forks. So a long time ago, I had the idea of like, how do you make TPU armor better? And I had this idea inspired by Jameson Go's singular flap on the side of saw blades for this kind of array of flap armor. And that's become really, really popular. You see it all over the place now, these, flaps of TPU. And that was originally designed to fight against Droopy, because Droopy is this, obviously massive thing of chaos. And when I'm fighting him with a hammer saw, the last thing I wanted him to do is kind of fly over the top and hit my uprights and all that stuff. So at the time, it was just a wall of TPU that did quite well, and people have adapted them into forks, which is now baleen. Um, and I've been kind of inspired when looking at Jelly Baby, how they were able to get underneath Cold Snap with these TPU forks and kind of destabilize that massive robot with what were, these tiny little things. So I've been kind of working into these like TPU flap forks where it looks like a normal TPU fork on the outside, but the geometry, and they have these like reinforced ridges that ride along the top, means that as a horizontal tries to drive into them, they hit these like reinforced ridges and kind of naturally bump up along the slope. And it's so far in the testing that I've done, and I've made a couple of these for other people, it's been really, really effective at just destabilizing and stopping horizontals. So I think it's something I'm really excited about, because it's always fun to come up with new counters. I'm a bit worried about horizontals in general, because so far it's been effective. And I think horizontals as an archetype are just fantastic, but they are one of the archetypes that just really rely on that shuffler bonus to have that weapon power to just kind of blast through people, because people have gotten really good at armoring their robots. Like, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, a big horizontal could come in and do a lot of damage, but there's just so much, advancements in TPU and titanium wedges and all this TPU spam, that it's getting really hard for them to kind of get through that material. But yeah, that's another thing that I'm working on and want to improve.
Well, that's exciting. I would be very excited and scared to see your take on a flamethrower. Um, they're pretty scary to fight as it is, and certainly have seemed to be pretty effective at various weight classes. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, being able to attack from a distance and not have to worry about it as much is a good problem to have. So. Yeah, are you planning on any NHRL appearances in 2026?
We'll see. I mean, there is going to be hopefully a Norwalk in California in July. It's not been officially announced, and I'm kind of just waiting to see where that's going. So, with the Norwalk potentially coming so close, I haven't really wanted to fly all the way out to the East Coast to do that. So I'm just kind of waiting, and we'll see. Hopefully, we get some information soon. But we'll see. I mean, Norwalk tried to do some out of state events in the past, and they didn't always plan out. So we'll see. But if that doesn't work, I'm sure, maybe the November Norwalk or something. That's always a fun one. So I might be back for that.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm sure that everyone will be, intrigued to see what you come with if you do. But yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on. Very insightful stuff.
Yeah, no,
Any
thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. Well, if anybody's watching this, please make sure, of course, that you like, subscribe, share, comment, engage with the content, all of that good stuff. Keep watching every combat robotics event that you can in the meantime. And we'll see everybody next time on the show.